Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the new sci-fi thriller I.S.S. It just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So January to March is often kind of referred to as like the dumping ground where Hollywood just sort of throws all of its less exciting, smaller scoped films. But kind of on the other side of that, unlike sort of the parade of big spectacle-driven blockbusters or sequels, the exciting part about some of these early type films in the year is that you never really know what to expect. You tend to get some more kind of diverse and original type stories. And in some ways, this film, I.S.S., reminds me a little bit of last year's film 65, which starred Adam Driver. It's kind of like a high-concept sci-fi film that lacks some of the bombastic scope of a big blockbuster, but did seem like it was perfectly suited to just sort of scratch that post-Christmas cinematic itch. And kind of in that same way, is I.S.S. A must-see new sci-fi classic? Probably not. But I do think that this is a really solid January movie. A well-crafted, kind of slow burn thriller that does make the most of a very intriguing concept. So the story of this it's set in kind of Cold War era and takes place exclusively on the International Space Station, which is like a space research center, kind of a joint effort between American and Russian astronauts and scientists. And things seem to be going well. They're getting along, doing great research, until suddenly the mood changes drastically as they spot like mushroom clouds and explosions as kind of down below on Earth, Russia and America erupt into nuclear war, and both governments send urgent orders to their kind of respective scientists to take control of the station by any means necessary. And suddenly these six sort of, three American, three Russian astronauts find themselves in a very tense and like claustrophobic situation, kind of questioning what they should do, if they should respond, who they can trust. And it's just a really engaging premise. Like you can put that into an IV, just pump it straight into my bloodstream all day long, because there's so much potential in a very simple but kind of captivating concept. And the filmmakers in this, they just make a lot of clever decisions and story choices to really capitalize on that promise of that concept. And this film is very much more like a thriller than it is an action movie. It's kind of like a pressure cooker of sort of slowly escalating tension, and a lot of that tension comes more from like the dread of like anticipating what might happen, what decisions might come, rather than kind of showcasing a bunch of just high adrenaline action scenes. And really, from the moment like war erupts on Earth, the situation on this space station is very much like a ticking time bomb that is going to explode at any minute. And I think aided by a very kind of relatively short runtime, the film is able to kind of maintain that kind of unnerved anticipation and tension really from start to finish. And personally, I'm a sucker for like contained stories, like movies that take place in a very limited space rather than a big scope. And this film takes advantage of sort of the cramped setting of this space station, because even the visuals very much like communicate just a feeling of a kind of claustrophobia. They're all kind of stuck in this very small space station, and they just have nowhere to go. There's nowhere to run or hide. And like as some characters might be like scheming or trying to talk about what to do, there's always that sense of like lurking fear that the other characters are just around the corner, or they might hear, or they might barge in at any minute. And kind of in a related way, just like the zero gravity of the space station is used in clever ways, to support some of that sort of claustrophobia and just that sense of like disorientation of both the audience and these characters. It's just slow and kind of cumbersome to move around the ship, and making it just a lot more dangerous for the characters. But speaking of the characters, this story has a very limited cast. It focuses exclusively on just these six astronauts. And kind of as you would expect, the first act of this film spends time to just establish who these people are, kind of establish their personalities, and kind of showcase this like developing friendship and trust that they have as as people and just as co-workers. I don't think any of the characters are necessarily explored with like a ton of depth to kind of who they are, but they are given enough of like kind of unique characteristics and quirks that they do come across as believable people, and as the audience, you are like, invested in their ultimate fate. And the whole cast in this, they're all good. A lot of like familiar but maybe hard to pin faces of people you've seen in things but might not remember. Not A-list stars. Kind of making the biggest impression in this is Ariana DeBose, who plays sort of the newcomer to the station, Kira Foster, like a research scientist, where she's charismatic, she's likable, but also flawed. And kind of similarly, she's definitely smart, she's capable, but she never comes across. They never try and force her character to be like a Ripley from Alien type like action hero. She always responds, at least to me, like to the situation in ways that are believable for a terrified, inexperienced astronaut, which just makes like the circumstances and the events just feel a lot more like believable. As far as content to consider, kind of things going on the surface of this film, there is a little bit. This is an R-rated film, and most of that comes because of the language. Because by my count, there are about 5 to 6 F-bombs that are in this film, as well as maybe 8 to 10 other profanities, which is both spoken, and there's at least 1 or 2 that are like in text as like subtitles when the Russian characters are speaking, as well as God and Jesus are both used each at least once in this as well. Violence, there's really not a whole lot of violence, although there is death. One character gets their head kind of hit from behind with like a very hard, blunt object, and there is some blood visible, and later sort of the assailant explains that he could feel like the skull crushing under the blow. Another character is like has his chest punctured with a power tool, and you do see briefly like the drill kind of drilling into his chest, and kind of similar to that, another character is stabbed in the neck quite slowly with like a screwdriver, and although you don't see the actual tool like pushing into the skin, there is like blood and stuff that comes up and kind of floating in the zero gravity. As far as sexuality, there's no like sex scenes or nudity. The only thing is that Ariana DeBose's character does reveal to one of the crew members that she was previously engaged to another woman, although that broke apart as her fiance ultimately cheated on her. But kind of outside of that conversation, her sexuality doesn't play into the plot in any other way. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this, kind of one of the main themes is just sort of our human nature as opposed to like the influence of society. When the astronauts look down kind of at Earth from the space station, it is described by them like from space you don't see borders, you don't see divisions, you just see kind of Earth. And I think although it's not stated as explicitly, I think the implication is also that they're speaking about more than just like national borders of countries, but just sort of the divisions that divide people. And kind of in that way, the International Space Station becomes almost this like idealistic picture of like transcending the sins of the broken world, almost this like separate like utopia where they're united and there are no borders. But obviously when the nuclear conflict comes, that idealistic understanding is quickly challenged. And the tension in this film quickly becomes whether the idealistic kind of unity of the space station will preserve or whether it will kind of devolve and become to reflect sort of the divisiveness that they see going on down at Earth. And kind of, although these characters have like left Earth, they've clearly brought their own human nature, their sinful nature with them, and kind of driven by either fear or selfishness. Kind of you watch as the bonds of friendship kind of are challenged and erode, and kind of the situation brings out the worst in these characters. And although sort of like the utopian vision does fall apart, I think this film ultimately has a message of hopefulness, that although people can't escape from their own human nature, they can't escape from all the pains of the world, they can kind of bond together and learn to trust each other in order to sort of overcome some of those challenges. Because kind of right at the end of this film, one of the characters makes the comment, it's good to have something to hold on to. And he's specifically referring to like some netting he put on for the mice that they use for experiments so that, instead of this floating around randomly in space, they can hold on to something. That visual becomes kind of a fitting metaphor just for the message of this film, that kind of life is like that. We're floating around, there's pain, there's suffering, there's division, and we need something to latch on to kind of stabilize ourselves. And kind of the scripture that came to mind with that is this the Apostle Paul's famous passage about, there's neither Jew nor Gentile in Galatians 3, where Paul's not, denying that such divisions of, race and gender and social status and all that. He doesn't deny that those exist, but because there are those things threatening to pull people apart, that's why we need to latch on to something that kind of transcends that, ultimately Jesus Christ. And obviously, the movie itself doesn't attribute like a spiritual answer to the problem. It kind of points more towards like a vaguer sense of just shared humanity and like goodwill among people. But I do think the general idea and message of that is an agreeable one for Christians. So in the end, I enjoyed this movie a lot. I think it is an effective sci-fi thriller that does lean into its strengths and avoids kind of overreaching or bogging the story down with just a bunch of needless like flash and spectacle. I think also with a runtime of just like an hour and a half, the movie doesn't overstay its welcome or stretch its premise beyond the point of being entertaining and thrilling. On the other hand, I do think the R rating for this movie wasn't necessary. I think it would have been just as effective as a PG-13 film and a more widely accessible film. Didn't need the language, which didn't really seem to fit with like the overall tone of the film. But kind of despite that, I enjoyed this film quite a bit. I think this is the perfect type of January movie. But hey, I'd love to hear what you guys think. If you guys check out this movie, jump in the comment section. Let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so, I encourage you guys to subscribe to our channel, become a Collider, get lots of fun stuff. We got movie reviews and a podcast and interviews and just other things. We'd love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe. Continue to collide through the world for Christ.